Hi, everybody. We're live. Welcome to a very special edition of Blaze Baking with Rach. We're coming to you on a Wednesday. As you guys know, we're normally here on Saturdays, but it's summertime and everybody's all over the place. And I'm so happy that Rebecca Soffer is here streaming in with us. I'm going to read you Rebecca's bio quickly, and then we're going to get started talking and baking because this is a really special episode and we have a lot to cover. So here we go. I got to put my glasses on for this. Rebecca Soffer is co-founder of Modern Loss, a global movement offering creative, meaningful, and practical content and community addressing the long arc of grief. She is also the co-author of the book Modern Loss: Candid Conversations About Grief, Beginner's Welcome, which was released in 2018. Go check out that book. And an internationally recognized speaker on loss and resilience. She writes regularly across media, including the New York Times, Glamour, NBC, and CNN. Rebecca is a Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism alumna. Sorry, I always get that messed up. And a Peabody Award-winning former producer for The Colbert Report. So in addition to writing about grief and loss beautifully and poignantly, she's also a very funny person. I will tell you that. Rebecca and her husband and sons split their time between New York City and the Berkshires. And for more information, you should visit Modern Loss. So I mentioned Rebecca's first book. We're here to talk about her second book, The Modern Loss Handbook, which just came out in May. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rachel. I love the Colbert Report too. Or loved RIP, but now it's the Late Show. So wherever Stephen is, it's amazing. I'm really glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, of course. And we were talking offline and I posted about this earlier. Rebecca and I met a few years through sort of like the writing community, the mother loss community. And I just love Rebecca like so many others. And we actually did an event together in person. Remember those? At Shakespeare.
That was the last pre-pandemic real life event that I did.
It was 2020 and we were like, should we be here? Probably shouldn't have, but we didn't know. And we did an event on the Upper West Side at Shakespeare & Co. with also Marissa Bartik-Rommel, who wrote another beautiful book. And it was a great night. And I remember Rebecca telling a story, as she can tell a story that makes everybody laugh and cry, about how after her mother died, when Rebecca was 30, I was 32 when my mother died, that you kept her chicken. I don't remember what the recipe for chicken was. What was the recipe?
No, once I was having just this awful time in New York, and I think I was going through a breakup, and I got an email from her saying, and I'm from Philly, so I living in Manhattan, my mom emailed me and she said, I'm coming up tonight, I'm bringing baked chicken. I was like, okay. And that Ziploc bag, she would like write on the Ziploc, like just so I wouldn't freeze it for like too many millions of years. Yeah. And it said Mom's Baked Chicken on the little Ziploc label. And after she died, I could not bring myself, like I found it in the freezer and it had been in there for way too long, of course. And I literally couldn't bring myself to throw out that bag. And I snipped out the note and I had it on my refrigerator for many years. The things we do, right?
Well, that story never left me. P.S. I started working for A Mighty Blaze during the pandemic, did the baking show, and I was like, I'm having Rebecca on one day, and we're going to cook, we're going to make something, and we're going to talk about writing and loss. And then, coincidentally, your wonderful new book, The Modern Loss Handbook, came out this spring. So before we get baking, can you tell us, and we are going to make zucchini bread, which is something Rebecca's mom used to make. But can you tell us the inspiration for the Modern Loss Handbook?
Sure. So this is my second book. And the first one was more a collection of essays, which I co-authored with my Modern Loss co-founder, Gabby Berkner, and all these other amazing people who contributed to the book. This book is solo authored by me, so slightly terrifying. And it's because I had a lot to say. The format is a lot more, it's for, users. It's literally an interactive, it's not a workbook, it's not a journal. Mm-hmm. It's a fully written book that has 3 goals. And the goals are to help you stay connected to your person, to help you stay connected to yourself, and to help you stay connected to the world around you. Because what I have learned in my whole grief experience, and those of the Modern Loss community members who have taught me so much over 9 years of running the community, is that those are the 3 goals. And if you can somehow manage to get a hold on them, and I'm not talking about like mastering them, I mean, get a hold on them, figure out like, how you keep memory alive, how you recreate rituals, how you deal with trigger days, but also how do you stay in touch with yourself, take care of your body, take care of your mind, like your anxiety, your sleep, your therapeutic needs. And then how do you take care of like how you commune with the outside world? Like, how do you deal with your friends who are maybe supporting you or not supporting you? How do you draw boundaries? How do you get through the workplace? So if you can figure out how to do all those things, which is not the thing that they tell you right when you get your grief card, right? That's when I really believe you can start building some meaning out of an experience that is so incredibly, can be really awful, and kind of maybe prove to yourself that, it's always going to be a shade of gray moving forward, but when wasn't it in life? But maybe you've got this somehow, like you have the tools in your toolbox and you know what to pull from. So that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted it to be something that you could sift through whenever you needed it. You could throw across the room for a couple months when you didn't. It's always going to be waiting there for you. I wanted to be like really cool designs and illustrations, because I didn't want it to be some lame, like, looking through a pastel filter, book about loss that you'd want to hide from everyone. And it's just really meant to be kind of like your very not judgmental, but slightly tough, lovey friend who can make you laugh a little bit along the way.
Well, very well said, because as somebody who read the book and then went back and even did some of the exercises, and I lost my mom 18 years ago, and I feel like I'm pretty moving through the grief process. Okay. Thanks to people like you and other work, but still have my days. I found it so helpful to have this, like to read it and then to refer back to it and to laugh and to go through some of the exercises that I still haven't really done in my, whether in my head or on paper. So.
And that's the thing. Like, I was my own guinea pig. My mom died many years ago, as did my dad. And when I finished writing this book, I then went through my manuscript and I was like, oh, I'm going to answer some of these questions that I came up with for the ritual, the memory, and also figuring out how to build your support crew and everything. They were as germane a year ago to me as they would have been 15 years ago. The answers were just slightly different. And to me, I was like, wow, that really just proves that loss is across the long arc and it's with you forever. Like, this isn't just for the first year after a loss. This is something that's meant to really be your handbook along the long arc of all of it.
Yeah. Well done. This is always the bizarre transition in a baking show, but we are going to keep baking. I will say that everyone should check out modernloss.com, because Rebecca and Gabby and the whole team at Modern Loss has done a lot of amazing community events throughout the pandemic online. And I think you guys did some rage baking. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. We have, there was a woman who's a Modern Loss reader who was a senior, like an executive pastry instructor at the Institute for Culinary Education in Chelsea or Battery Park City, whatever. And when the pandemic hit, she's like, I'm not teaching any baking classes in person because we aren't doing that. And I was like, great, why don't you just teach a rage baking class for Modern Loss? And we made like funfetti cupcakes. It was something so innocuous, but we had so much fun because everybody was just so, this was like maybe May of 2020, we all needed an outlet, but we all needed to do it together somehow, which is exactly what you're doing, providing the connection points.
It's awesome. So when I was emailing back and forth with Rebecca, I was like, what should we bake? Mm-hmm. And Rebecca suggested zucchini bread. I added the chocolate chips, have to make it a little sweet, because your mom, Shelby, made zucchini bread. Is that right?
She did. She was also like the first person I knew to maybe bake tofu for my family, which my father loved. And I remember she was very, she was a very functional hippie in the 60s in San Francisco. She was a public school teacher there. She's originally from Philadelphia. So was always like very, she was like a little stereotypical in terms of she's the first person I knew to have a juicer in the 80s, I knew what carob was in 1987, but she ate real food and served us, real food. You know what I mean? Right. Like it was not all replacements, but her decadent specialties were not like Black Forest cake or like something that was just like incredibly laden with, fat and deliciousness. It was like really good zucchini bread, or like really good little arugula. It was just the perfect taste, And so when I love making zucchini bread because first it's like the easiest thing ever and I need ease.
Yes, I appreciate that too, because some people on the show, we've made these like crazy decorative 7-layer cakes and I'm like, oh
no, if someone told me I had to, my 8-year-old son would love that task.
Right.
I am much more of like can we dump everything in to a dish and then it comes out and maybe it doesn't look amazing, but it tastes amazing. Like that's my jam. And I'm a big zucchini bread fan. I'm a big banana bread. I'm a big put stuff and turn it into a bread fan, as was my mom. And she would have appreciated that you are adding chocolate chips.
Okay. I think
it's very bittersweet. Yes.
I hope she would also appreciate too that because it's summertime, I think your mom would appreciate this. I go to CSA to a farm where we pick our vegetables.
Ooh,
and so I have fresh zucchini that I graded from there.
I love it.
I'm going to do that. So I'm going to kind of, for people who are baking at home, I kind of started the ingredients. If you want to bake with us at home, preheat your oven to 325, grease your bread pan, which I already did. This is like the baking show part of it. And then I started the wet ingredients. It's 1/3 cup of melted butter and 2 eggs. I cracked the eggs already because, and you guys don't need to see me possibly get shells in the bowl. Yeah. So I'm adding that. And to that, I'm also going to add 1/3 cup of oil and a teaspoon of vanilla and the zucchini, and that's the wet ingredients. So I'm going to do that. I wanted to ask you, Rebecca, one of the things in your book that stuck with me that you mentioned a little bit earlier was kind of dealing with loss in the modern world when you have to go back to work and deal with your friends and the world around you. And I was struck a little bit by the part you talked about friends, about in terms of the friends who are there for you, the friends that say the right thing, the friends that say the wrong thing, the friends you gain. Like, I feel like I've gained a whole lost group of friends, including you, and the friends you unfortunately lose. Or maybe, I don't know if it's fortunate, whatever it is. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's something people don't always think about when they lose their person.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that there's an entire chapter in the book, I think it's called Navigating and Negotiating Friendships and Social Dynamics. And that's because we just don't talk about the fact that one of these secondary losses that can come out of a primary loss, right? And let's just call the primary loss for this purpose, a death loss, right? Someone dies, or, a divorce, whatever, right? We don't talk about how your friendships are going to be affected because not everybody feels comfortable with the thing that you're going through. Not everybody feels like they can sit with you in the discomfort and the pain and the uncertainty without, saying like the wrong thing. And I'm not saying people say the wrong things all the time. I still say the wrong thing, but not everybody is willing to try to get to the point where they're saying the right thing. Not everybody wants to learn. They just feel uncomfortable. And that's because we just don't do a good job of normalizing talking about this stuff in our culture. It's not normally because they're just awful. I mean, some of us are, but we read the news, come on. But a lot of us are, I think inherently, we do care about our friends when they're going through something really hard, but it might trigger something in us. It might trigger, another loss that we've had, an uncomfortable experience. It may make us feel like if we get too close to this awful thing that our friend is going through, that maybe somehow it'll be contagious, like we'll catch it. And if we don't engage with it or don't really imagine it, then we can somehow control it happening to us. And I really believe that this is what we feel. Of course, also, we don't like being reminded that our time is limited. I have yet to meet one person who's beat those odds, And so there's a lot of reasons that we don't show up for our friends when they're dealing with profound loss. And I wanted to be the person who would say it up front because I would have really loved to hear this from someone instead of having the painful experience of being very, very disappointed and hurt by a couple of people who I thought they were my rides or die, And guess what? Some of them are now again. because I don't talk about like, hey, you need to cut people out of your life forever. In this book, in this chapter, I just talk about the reality of the fact that everybody is dealing with overwhelming things in their life. And sometimes the combination of what they're dealing with and how they, what you're going through is resonating with them may make it so that they actually just are really shitty friends to you. They don't help you and support you. And so I kind of guide you through, well, then who is it in your circle who can hang? Who is able to like be this person who can give this to you, that to you, the other? Like I try and guide you through like very specific things to look for in your existing community and figure out how to get them from a variety of people, not just one. There's no like magical, there's no one vaccine in a person format that is going to help you through every facet of your loss, right? And then I talk about, well, what about some people who aren't making you feel so good? Can you take a break? Can you speak up for yourself? Here is how you might want to speak up for yourself. Here is how you might want to draw some boundaries. And then by extension, I talk about like that third realm, which is like all these people like you, right? Like you're my grief friend, Rachel. All the people that you actually can meet. Mm-hmm. That will not only come out of the woodwork for you, but maybe you're just going to meet them unexpectedly, through some activity or just conversation at the playground. And they're going to become your people because they get what you're going through, and you're going to get somewhere intimate so much more quickly than you would have otherwise, because you're both coming to something from the backdrop of a really hard thing. And to me, that's a really beautiful thing. It doesn't make it so that you're grateful that you've gone through a loss. I mean, that would be disingenuous of me. Of course, I wish I could turn back time for everyone, but that's just not the way it works. And so what can we do to create some meaning from it? And that's why there's a whole chapter dedicated to this stuff.
Yeah. And I think your book also gives advice or just things to think about for people who maybe haven't gone through losing somebody so close to them, for how to support a friend or somebody. And that's really important too, because like you were saying, not like everyone's a bad person, although we do watch the news, like you said, but some people don't know what to do or say. And so, people will say things like, oh, what can I do? What can I do? Well, instead of maybe saying that, like actually do something. It could be a little thing. Right.
Or like, look, I always say, when you literally don't know the right thing to say, then say that. Say, I wish I knew the perfect thing to say. I wish I knew the perfect thing to say. What you're going through looks so hard. And I've never been through anything like that. And maybe you haven't either. And I don't know what the right thing to say is, but I'm really sorry that this is happening to you, that you're going through this. And I want to understand what it feels like. And I'm here to listen, and not just say that once, but just make it clear through your ongoing actions that you're going to give this person an ongoing invitation. It doesn't have to be in a lofty, poetic way. It can just be sending a text being like, it's Tuesday night, I'm thinking of you. Like, how's it going today? Like how was today? Like anchor something in time. And when it comes to, yes, like what can I do if there's ever anything I can do? And then you like trail off with an ellipses. People, especially in early grief, they have no idea what you can do for them. They don't even know like what they're going to eat later that day. They don't know what their life is going to look like. They don't know how they're going to, emotionally survive sometimes. So they really don't want to have the onus put on them of like figuring out what you can do for them. And so I always say, look, is it a work friend? Is it a really good friend? Their life. Like if you're a person in a certain inner circle who knows what they need. Do they have little kids? Do they have a lawn that needs mowing? Are you a neighbor? Like, is their pool full of crap? I don't have a pool, but that sounds nice. If it were full of crap and I were a neighbor, maybe I'd like help clean the pool. Is there anything that can be done to make life a tiny, tiny, tiny bit easier? Are you a coworker? Can you say, hey, like we're back at the office now and it's COVID times. Oh, this like sucks. I know that we're both in the office on Thursdays. Do you want to have like a coffee with me every Thursday? And like, even if you're not into it on some weeks, I'm just going to ask you every week. Maybe you'll say no. Yes, maybe you'll say no. Like, just think about what is it that's specific that you can offer that person. That always goes it just goes so much further. It will be a more meaningful thing to offer than if there's ever anything I can do. Because if there is ever anything I can do is the equivalent of a company telling an employee you have unlimited vacation. Like, what does that really mean? you know?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great analogy. Speaking of COVID, okay, I'm gonna add the dry ingredients. I know
No, let's talk about COVID.
I know, but
I haven't talked
the
or
dry
thought about it.
ingredients, and then we're gonna talk about COVID. This is like
Great.
sometimes I have more like fun, uplifting stuff, and it's easy to be like, add the sugar. So we have a cup and a half of in a separate bowl, a cup and a half of flour. We're adding a half a cup of brown sugar, half a cup of sugar, and then a half a teaspoon of salt and baking powder and baking soda. And as I'm going to do that, I wanted to ask you about something that I feel like you probably get asked about a lot, but we're almost 2.5 years into this pandemic. We were talking about it offline, how we're still trying to get our kids back into like some kind of normal world. And obviously COVID hit, everybody was at home. The country, the world dealt with a collective loss, whether people wanted to admit to it or not. And how have you found sort of your work at Modern Loss and the community and the conversations you're having? How has that helped or evolved sort of during the last 2 years? I know that's like a big question, but
yeah, I mean, like, well, I will say that this is the first time in 9 years that, or well, from the 7-year mark to the 9-year mark of doing Modern Loss, that no one looks at me like I'm a weird person when I say what I do. For many years after starting Modern Loss in 2013, you know, I recognized that there was a need to talk about grief in a way that was like really let it all hang out and warm and communal and funny and messy and whatever, right? But a lot of people didn't, because they didn't get it. They thought it was like a very niche subject that eventually would hit them, but not now. So why should they know about it? That sounds morbid. Well, fast forward to 2020, and everybody knows what grief feels like. We have had so much grief, not just grief from death loss, from way more than 1 million COVID deaths in the US alone. The real number is probably more like 1.3 million at this point. Wow. And that's just from COVID. So just think about all the grief that is going, you know, just permeating our country just from that, right? Not to mention the ongoing trauma mode we've all been living in, thanks to the pandemic, which has proven that there is no normal. It's literally never going back to normal. Like anyone
use that word. I shouldn't say when I said our kids are normal, it's just going back to something, to freedom.
To creating a new normal, right? Creating a new normal, a new abnormal. And that feeling of being reminded that we don't really have any control, that everything feels very tenuous. The loss and grief that we've had from, you know, the loss of our coping mechanisms in person, the loss of the ability to celebrate rites and rituals and mourn with each other and hug each other, the fear of touch, you know, it's been so much. And not to mention, you know, the political divisiveness, January 6th, the elections, like all the crap that's going on. It's a lot. And I think that if you feel like you're dealing with something that feels like grief, it is grief. And you deserve the chance to sit with that and examine it and think about it, and then think about like, what is it that you need that might make you feel a little better, a little more anchored? Like, is it a combination of a good therapist? Is it a combination of a community? I am someone who believes in the power of community when it comes to grief and loss. And I'm talking about stemming from any type of grief and loss, right? And that you can experience as a person. I think that when we share our stories in ways that are open and raw and vulnerable, that we're able to pull other people in, we're able to make that person feel less isolated. We're able to feel like we're sharing our own stories in ways that aren't allowing society to create those stories for us. Like, we're really standing in our own narrative. And then also we're teaching other people empathy. We're teaching them what it feels like to go through what we're going through. And so maybe by extension, we're teaching them how to be a better friend or a better support or a better partner or whatever. And maybe we're teaching them that, yeah, it would be nice to have policy change. Like, it would be nice to have bereavement job protections. Maybe it would inspire other people to create more grassroots change. So I do have a very lofty view of the power of storytelling. And so during the course of the pandemic, you know, Modern Loss, we initiated as an online magazine, but very quickly grew into like live storytelling events, books, etc. And so I just had to pivot immediately to online only connection points, which was enormously difficult for me because I was also reeling from COVID in my own family. And I had to leave Manhattan and figure out like somewhere to be for a few. It was overwhelming. And the needs of our community were like skyrocketing because we had all these new community members, but then we had members who were dealing with resurfaced feelings of grief, right? Like this feeling of new COVID was reminding them of like the early days after their mom died or their partner died or a miscarriage, and they were being very triggered. And so I created all of these virtual events. Like every month we do yoga for grief support online. We do mindfulness. We just had a session on nature as like with the outdoor nature expert at the Kripalu.
I still want to come to Kripalu yoga. It's on my list.
Yeah, he was amazing. And so like we do this every month because people, yes, a lot of people are back in the world. Sure. I'm still pretty COVID cautious, but like,
well,
yeah,
actually,
back in the world.
I was going to do Kripalu online, but then at some point get up there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, yes. So we offer all these things and that's, yeah, like that's how I pivoted, you know, and I did like 2 Festivus events online 2 years in a row. I called it the Zooming of grievances because I also believe that we are in these darkest of times, but we're still human. And we still need to laugh, and we need to be reminded that we're human. There's nothing disrespectful about laughing, about being sarcastic and bawdy, about even the worst of things. If it feels like something we need for ourselves, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else, you do you. And so we provide a lot of like valve release opportunities because that's the only way that you can keep going. You can't draw from an empty well.
Yeah, no, so well said. There's so much in there. Going back to storytelling, I guess I totally agree with you, the importance of storytelling. And that's why people, I mean, like you mentioned, your first book, the first Modern Loss book.
Modern Loss, Candid Conversation.
Candid Conversations, Beginner's Welcome. I mean, I read that a couple of times just to hear everybody's stories from different perspectives. And then the Modern Loss website, I've had the pleasure of writing a couple essays for you guys. I think I did one about going back to Broadway 10 years. The curtain went dark for me 10 years after my mom died. And then I went back, and then I felt a similar thing about going back to Broadway just this spring to see a show after, not after, but since things changed during the pandemic. So the storytelling is super duper powerful. I totally get that. And it's true. I mean, in a way, not to make light of it, but you were ahead of your time creating a community, based around grief. And then when COVID hit, you saw the need for it, and there was a need for it. And you so well said that it's not just about losing people to disease or death or COVID, but the loss of the life as we know it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so what I want people to realize is that like, you don't have to have a dead person in your life to feel like you're grieving.
Right.
I feel like it's very, very hard to heal without acknowledgement. And when I say heal, I don't mean get over anything. That's like a unicorn getting over something. What's that, Rach, right? Like, no, you don't get over anything. But you move through it and you experience it in different ways. And sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder. And then maybe you build resilience and coping mechanisms that help you to manage it from like a more like solid foundation, right? And so I feel like when you don't feel like you're being acknowledged in something that's really hard, just think about like if you worked really hard on a work project and your boss was like, all right, thanks. Like, and you're like, dude, I gave up like a weekend to do this. Thanks for acknowledging that. What do you feel? You feel resentment. You don't really feel inured to that person or that company. It doesn't really engender a lot of like excitement in you, or desire to go the extra mile again. So just imagine what it feels like when you're going through something really hard, like grief stemming from something, and you don't feel acknowledged. You don't feel like someone is like seeing you in this hard thing. And instead they're like, well, at least your mom and you had a good relationship, or, you could always get pregnant again, or like, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Like, and then they say something that they went through, which is like just taking away your little stage just for a minute. And there's enough room in the world for everybody's sad story, So I just feel like everybody needs to just figure out how they can feel acknowledged in the hard thing that they're dealing with, and then figure out how to get that acknowledgement. Not from everyone in the world, you're not going to get it. But even if you get it from a few people, a professional, a community, a couple friends, a couple new friends, then that makes you more naturally open to being there for others because you don't spend all that energy wishing that you would be seen.
Totally. And also, like, now I think we need that more than ever to acknowledge it ourselves so that we can heal over this long arc, even if it's not, like we said, the loss of a person. It's, when COVID first hit, I was like, it's okay. We'll do Zoom school. It's like, no, this sucks.
That was a mess.
Yeah. And you have to acknowledge it, and then you have to like take it from there. And if you don't, now I'm getting on a soapbox here. If you bury it, if you don't talk about it, it's just going to come back to bite you, really.
Yeah, it will. It will. I mean, that's what I've got to say about that. But I really encourage people, look at what's going on in the news, and then we're supposed to be doing business as usual.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
You need to you can't keep running on empty and not just, there's this book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it's the best title of all time because the body does keep the score. If you don't stop and figure out, what you need to keep going and to feel like you're getting some sort of, nourishment from the world and from people in the world, then eventually it's just going to catch up with you. You can fool everybody but yourself.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to combine the ingredients together.
Not just sound like a Grim Reaper. It's more like you just got to take care of yourself. Right. That's all. That's like the TLDR.
Right. We talked about friendship. I'm curious also because I know you're involved in sort of a larger movement in terms of changing things up in our society and in our workplace. And I know your story so well. I don't know that all of our viewers know, you mentioned it, but you lost your mother suddenly when you were 30, and you lost your father 4 years later at 34. And you were at this stage, if I can speak for you a little bit, is that you weren't a little girl, you weren't an old lady, you were just starting your sort of adult life at 30, right? And it was kind of a weird place to be. That's kind of how Modern Loss started. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that, and then also about how you see the need for things to change in the workplace for every modern American human being who's trying to, honor their person, learn how to deal with grief and loss, and move forward in the world. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, when my mom was killed in a car accident, like you said, when I was 30 and I was working full time and I was trying to build my career, my life, I was very much in build mode. And it became very evident very quickly, like how difficult it is to navigate that line between build mode and loss mode. And you have no choice because you have to keep building, but you're faced with this profound loss. And so because I was a full-time employee, I was really building on my career. I didn't have any days off because I worked I was a producer for the Colbert Report. I didn't get any days off because when you're
dealing with this huge loss.
Yeah, I had to kind of rely on like the kindness of the people I work for to say, oh gosh, like take some time. But I didn't know what that meant. What does some time mean? Does that mean a week?
A day or 6 months?
So I was like the guinea pig for everybody I worked with. Like I literally was like the template that everybody based their hard experiences off of afterwards. I took a couple of days. I think I took a week off. I was in shock. And then I went back because a lot of people said, work is good. You should focus, blah, blah, blah. It was good sometimes. And sometimes it was absolute torture. I mean, I worked in comedy, like it was hard sometimes. But I realized later, I wish that I could have had like a slightly flexible schedule one day. I wish that maybe I could have taken a week or two off a few months down the line because no one told me that my dad was going to say, hey, can you please deal with all your mom's things? Like, the loss experience is not just not just planning the funeral or whatever you're going to do. It's a years long thing that, some of the initial logistics and emotional fallouts, they can unfold for years. And so I think that we just don't do a good job in our country of supporting that reality. I think we give a median of 3 bereavement days, paid days in the workplace in this country. And that's not even, that's probably the minority of companies. And so I have been very vocal in grassroots movement that is advocating for job protections in the United States, because there is literally no job protection. If your company does not have a policy and your husband drops dead tomorrow, you could be fired if you don't go into work the next day. If your son is killed in a shooting, you could be fired if you don't go to work the next day. And sometimes grief is not just about, actually all the time, it's not just about choosing an outfit for your person to wear at their funeral, but it's figuring out, where are you going to live now? Do I need to transfer a car title or a deed? How do I get into a bank account? Like, there's a lot of insults to injury that are logistical necessities that come out of grief. And so I'm really vocally advocating for this country to finally get its act together and support people, because, like, hearkening back to what I said, there are at least 9 million people in the United States who are directly grieving a COVID death alone. That's a lot of grieving people. Let's support them. Mm-hmm. If not, also the economy is going to fall apart, because you're going to have a lot of dysfunctional people out there who aren't supported.
Right, right. And so how is that work going? And have you, like, has it blown up, so to speak, during COVID? Like, is that continuing? Like, how is your advocacy work going?
I really love this organization called Evermore. They're a nonprofit grassroots organization which really advocates for this. And I was very vocal. Biden had included bereavement protections in the Build Back Better plan, the American Families Plan, which we all know did not pass, which was very sad, very, very upsetting. But I still somehow have faith and hope. I don't know that I have optimism, but I have hope that we'll get there. I don't exactly know how. I don't understand why grief needs to be a partisan thing. I think it's pretty much a universal thing.
Everybody dies from both sides. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know why it would mean that, like, the Democrats would have to have the House and the Senate, but, I think that traditionally they are more of like a, social structure, support, party.
Support. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I have hope. Without hope, what do I have?
Right.
The other day I was sitting around, I'm like, God, I feel hopeful and not optimistic really, but hopeful about some things. And I'm just like, it just feels so audacious. And then I was like, God, that would be the audacity of hope. And then I realized that was Obama's autobiography. I was like, that would be an amazing title. And then I realized, yes, because it is an amazing title.
We have Margaret, one of our viewers, saying grief and cake, both universal forces. Totally true.
Yes, Margaret. And I wanted to say, like, when you're making the zucchini bread, just like, I love what kind of comes to light while watching someone cook, or like when we're talking about food. My mom had a garden. I'm from outside Philadelphia, mainline Philly. And we always had a garden, and she grew zucchini every year. So the zucchini bread, I should say, you that's from your CSA. It was always from our garden. And she was so proud of that, because she grew up in a row house in Northeast Philly. They never had a garden. And so she just developed this love of gardening. And I think she had this awe of, like, wow, I can make something grow out of, like, nothing. And it is an amazing feeling. And we'd go camping every August and come back, and all the zucchini that was coming in while we were away would be like the size of baseball bats. And you wouldn't eat those, but, like, it was always just really fun. And, like, it's bringing back a lot of really nice memories doing this conversation.
That's amazing.
So thank you.
I'm glad you told that. I feel very connected to you and her through making this, for sure. And even with baking, which I've baked forever, but particularly through the pandemic and through the show, it's like, when you're going through something, if you're feeling sad or anxious or overwhelmed, sometimes, for me at least, this is my jam. I go into the kitchen and I start baking, and it's like gardening or walking or anything. It's something to focus your brain on, your fingers on. It helps.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that's why I've been buying so much butter and flour and sugar during the pandemic and eating everything inside. And then I go on my walks around the block. So you got to do it all.
Power walks.
So we have a child walking through, this is what happens during the baking show from home. But I wanted to open up our show to viewer questions, if we have any, for people who want to ask Rebecca anything about her book, or Modern Loss Community, or zucchini bread, or rage baking, or anything else. If we have any questions, we might not, but we'll give it a second. I know we've had some comments come through. Sorry, I have a little background stuff going on. Oh, great question here. I was curious about this too. What is next for you? Another book? Rebecca's still in the midst of this tour. She's been all over.
Oh my gosh, I'm like so tired from this one. I don't know. I think that the immediate next-ish thing is, I have a couple media projects that I'd like to get underway that have been kind of golden dream tickets on my wall for a while, but I'm just one person, so I can only do so many things qualitatively. And now that this book is out, I'm really proud of it. It's gotten really warm reception. I'm hoping that can enable me to do some of these dream projects that I know I could do well. I do a lot of public speaking, and so that's something that I'm really kind of directing my efforts toward this fall and winter. I have a whole other leg of my book tour coming up through the Jewish Book Council. I'm going to like 12 places all over the country and Canada, which I'm looking forward to. But also I do a lot of corporate talks, and that's something I really love. Corporate talks and talks for educational organizations, like speaking at Williams College, speaking at the University of Pennsylvania. And then I do a lot of corporation talks for affinity groups, like mental health affinity groups, wellness groups that companies are realizing they should support because their employees are human people who need to be supported in that sense. So for me, that's what I really love doing, is like literally being able to connect directly with people and talk to them and hear their questions, engage with them.
Okay, we have a question here. This is a great piece. You guys can check it out. Everyone should go check out Rebecca Soffer, by the way, on Instagram to see where she's going to be on her book tour and on the Modern Loss website. But can you talk about your piece in Time Magazine that you wrote, which people can go check that out?
Oh, sure. I mean, that was the saddest piece I've ever written in my life. It came out in April. It was their lead essay about hitting 1 million COVID deaths in the United States. And they said, do you have something to say about this? And I was like, I do. And they let me write it. And the thesis statement was basically, that phrase, I can't imagine, and people say, oh, I can't imagine. Oh my gosh, like what you're going through. I can't imagine. And how that just irks me to the nth degree, because like, you can't imagine, and I'm not talking about, by the way, for people who react like I say that all the time, but I'm not saying like literally every time you say I can't imagine, you mean I don't want to imagine. I'm saying the people that say, oh, I can't imagine. And then they're like, and that's all that I'm going to engage with this person on this topic. Because I think the thing is that some of these things that are happening are so painful on a societal level, on an individual level. And they're so enormously difficult to imagine that we don't want to. Look at what happened in Uvalde. Look at what happened with Roe v. Wade. I mean, think about all the literal grief from death loss that's going to come out of that one, in terms of maternal related, mortality rates. It's a lot. And so we say we can't imagine, but I argue that we kind of have to. Because if we don't imagine, then we're going to make so many people feel so lonely. We are basically going to be negating the realities of the majority of society at this moment. And that is the opposite of pulling each other in and creating community, which is the salve we actually really desperately need during these times, which are not getting much easier, And so my, argument is to say, listen, I encourage everybody to make the effort to seek out and listen and absorb people's stories from these times and just their own personal losses not related to a pandemic. Because if you look around and toss a pebble, chances are like in any direction, you're going to hit somebody that has 1 or a million stories, and it's worth listening to them. So that was my piece. Wow. And it was very sad. It was very sad to write. And my book came out the week that we hit 1 million COVID deaths. And then the next week or two was the Uvalde shooting. And then 2 weeks later, it was Roe v. Wade. So I feel like I've been doing a lot of unexpected speaking to very specific types of grief that have been really sad,
Wow. Well done for doing that. It was a powerful piece. And, I'm even hearing you
Thanks.
speak about it now. So now it's another question, which I feel like is a good one. And I can relate to this a little bit too. How do you reconcile grief with comedy? I think there's
Yeah.
a connection.
Yeah. I mean, like,
Very,
okay. So there are certain situations that
very funny.
yeah, thank you. There's certain situations that I fail to find any humor in. I mean, because I was just talking about Uvalde. I see no humor in that. Nothing. There's literally nothing that I can even remotely find containing any levity. That said, I'm not a direct survivor of that experience. And if I were, I wouldn't, or I would not fault somebody for trying to find some levity just so that they can feel like that reminder that they're still human beings. So that's why I say, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else, just kind of move through your grief experience in whichever way feels true to you. For me, I think that comedy plays an enormous role in my experience with loss, not just the initial grief, but like how I live as a person in the world years down the line after my mom's death and my dad's death. I love a good gallows humor joke. I, find that not only does it serve as like some relief or a valve release when I really need it. Sometimes I can choose between losing my mind and laughing. I can't always choose. And when I can choose, I'll choose the laughter, right? Because it just makes me feel like it literally relaxes me and it resets me. Also, it helps me build connection. It helps me build community. When I can make a dead mom joke with another person who can make a dead mom joke, that's awesome. They're my people.
You can do that any day with me.
Yeah. It's like, you got to hang. We can't just rend our clothes every single day for the rest of our lives. That's not living. That's not living, at least in the way that I want to live. Yeah. And so that's why I say like modern loss is very much about the long arc of it. I'm not just saying like, hey, like find everything funny the day after your dad dies. Like if you want to laugh at a funeral, go for it. I've laughed at my own parents' funerals because it felt so ludicrous and abnormal that like I had to laugh at some things because it felt so weird, and then separately, I just believe that when you're talking about a topic that can really scare people like grief and loss, things that are really overwhelming, that if you do it in a way that's warm and conversational and casual and has some humor, that's just like a lot better of a way to talk about something that's scary than like bashing it over someone's head and freaking the hell out of them. They'll hear what you're saying, but they're never going to come back. And so if you do it this way, they'll come back because you're like, hey, like the worst has already happened, all we're doing is getting you to think and talk about it.
Yeah. All right. We're getting such good questions. I think we have time for this and maybe one more, but this is, you mentioned gaining and losing friends after loss. Any relationships that you regret losing now that there is some distance?
Well, I have to say that I feel very fortunate that I don't think that I lost any friendships permanently that I regret losing. I had some good friends who were not really as supportive as I really was hoping that they would be. And in the majority of their cases, we were 30. This was like the age where my friends were doing medical residencies, or they were law associates, or, they were maybe having a first kid or getting their MBA. Like this was an age where a lot of people were in extreme build mode. And so I could not see past my own nose to appreciate that can be overwhelming for them. That was overwhelming for them. For my friend, who was an OBGYN, it was overwhelming that she was, in her third year of residency and getting hazed by nurses at Staten Island University Hospital every day and working 12 hours a day. She could barely keep her act together, but she was one of my best friends. And I was so angry with her because she just wasn't there. But she was not even there for herself. And so, yeah, like we definitely took a break because not in terms of having fights or whatever, but just me being like, okay, like you're just not my friend anymore. But guess what? Like, I just say this like years later, she's one of my best friends. I just saw her when I was on my book tour in LA, and we spent the whole day together. And so I do think that you can lose friends, but it doesn't mean you're going to lose them permanently, because you need to give people a chance to realize what they might have done better. And I think that the only way they'll realize it is if you tell them how they could do better. And if they don't listen, maybe down the line, they'll realize that, you know, you're important to them and come to you. But, you know, and then maybe you'll be open to talking to them and forgiving them and starting anew if you care about them. So, you know, I guess I'm just like a big proponent of like, this world is so hard. It's so sad. It's so full of loss and divisiveness. If you have people who are trying to come back to you and right a wrong that they did you when you were very vulnerable, then at least listen to them. People mess up. We're all human.
We do. I mean, the person who's going through the loss messes up too. I mean, it's
absolutely. I always say, like, by the way, you don't have carte blanche to treat people like crap when you're grieving, right?
No.
Like I talk about, it's like, yeah, I definitely can be in an awful mood or whatever. Like I'm going through an awful time, but that doesn't give me license to treat my friends like dirt all the time. You know, like there's a difference between going through a hard time and literally turning into like a person who's being toxic to others. And I'm giving you tough love here because you just will lose friends if you keep doing that. That's not my decision. It's probably their decision. And so I just feel like you need to remember that, yeah, like you're human, but they're human too. Everybody is trying to figure out the new normal with this new dynamic. And sometimes, you know, like the only incidents where I say, hey, cut that person loose and don't let them back in is if they're being really toxic, if they're insisting on like toxic positivity, if they're like, oh, really, no bad days. I know you say you're having a hard time, but come on, look on the bright side. Or they're literally negating what you're going through. Like, I don't understand why you're not just over it already. Or they're being really hurtful. Like those are people who probably you shouldn't be friends with anyway, much less when you're grieving.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, our behind the scenes producer, Michelle, who was talking to Rebecca before about loss. That's it for questions. Rebecca, I could seriously talk to you all day. I loved baking with you, Shelby zucchini. I feel like from my CSA, but really from her farm. And, you know, this has just been so great. We've learned a lot. It's so eye-opening. People should definitely go check out the Modern Loss Handbook. Check out Rebecca on tour. Definitely follow her on Instagram because you're going to find a lot of cool things that Rebecca's doing. She's always surprising us and doing cool things. I loved her video with Gayle King when she was on the CBS morning. It was very cool. So definitely fun. And, you know, thank you for joining us during these crazy times. It was just felt really good in the middle of this week to have this conversation with you. So I really appreciate you spending time with us, and good luck with the book tour and everything.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. It's a real bright spot in the world. Keep going.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you guys. And we'll see you next time on the next baking show. Dates to be announced. We're planning a bunch of stuff for late summer and early fall. So thanks, everybody. Bye.